So continuing our series on Omega level mutants, which focuses explicitly on the powers of Marvel's most powerful mutants, we pick up now with Nate Gray, also known as X-Man. Now for those of you who are unfamiliar with the terminology of Omega level, this phrasing is designed to reference individuals who can warp reality, are inherently immortal, meaning they can't be killed by any normal means, or have a level of telepathy and telekinesis that have reached a point where they can't be surpassed. Having said that, if you haven't seen my video on the origins of Cable, which you'll find in the description, we had talked about how his mutant powers of telepathy and telekinesis were greatly reduced due to being exposed to the techno-organic virus by Apocalypse. As a result, instead of allowing his powers to expand naturally at a young age, he was taught and has consistently used his powers to keep the virus from eating him alive, something that has kept Cable away from the opportunity to reach his full potential and achieve Omega level status. However, for Nate Gray, this was never an issue. Originally hailing from the Age of Apocalypse timeline, an alternate reality resulting from the mutant David Haller traveling into the past and killing Charles Xavier, because the death of Professor Xavier prevented the formation of the X-Men as we know them, the villain Apocalypse had seized the opportunity to take control of North America. While some of these changes were small in that Magneto had led the Johnny-come-lately X-Men instead of Xavier, other changes were huge in that the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, and Spider-Man were either killed off or never formed as a team. In addition to these varying differences between the Age of Apocalypse and the main Marvel Universe, the mutant geneticist Mr. Sinister believed that the offspring of Jean Grey and Scott Summers would produce a child of incredible power capable of destroying Apocalypse and ending his reign. However, unlike the main Marvel continuity, because the X-Men never formed under Xavier, the opportunity never occurred for Jean and Scott to engage in a coupling. But because both mutants had served time in the pens under the experimentation of Beast, who was a direct servant of Sinister, Sinister was able to use their DNA as it had been acquired by Hank McCoy, allowing him to clone a child. It's for this reason that much like Strife, who exists as Cable's clone, Nate Gray is essentially what Cable would have been had he not been infected by the techno-organic virus. However, unlike Strife, Nate Gray was destined for a premature death, and that when Sinister cloned him, he had removed the natural barriers that kept Nate's powers in check, meaning that once he reached maturity, the enormous amount of energy he possessed would quite literally burn his body out. Having said that, in his original appearances, Nate Gray's power was not highly defined. Instead, the Age of Apocalypse consistently alluded to the idea that Nate Gray had massive amounts of energy, which were commonly depicted in primitive forms of telepathy and telekinesis. As a result, this revelation combined with the depiction of his character as coming of age in a world ruled by Apocalypse made him extremely popular among the Marvel reader base, meaning that when Age of Apocalypse ended and the timeline was reset to normal, Nate Gray was folded into the main Marvel universe with his own self-titled line of comics. Now focusing on his powers, where Nate Gray quite literally fell out of the sky and landed in the main Marvel continuity, his initial arrival did not draw the attention of anyone, and therein was Marvel's first indication that Nate Gray possessed incredible abilities. In X-Men issue number 10 following his arrival to the main Marvel universe, the mutant telepath and telekinetic time traveler known as Blacksmith had informed Charles Xavier that a mutant with the same genetic signature as Cable had arrived in their time. Investigating the scene for himself prior to meeting with Xavier, Blacksmith discovered that Nate Gray had stumbled into Dark Beast, the version of Hank McCoy who had also survived the Age of Apocalypse. Where Blacksmith originally thought that Nate might have been Strife, another Omega-level mutant and the clone of Cable, Blacksmith also came to the realization that the powers of Nate Gray exceeded those of Cable and even Professor Xavier. Now the importance of this was that as the world's most powerful telepath, while Xavier did sense Nate Gray for a few seconds, this only came when Nate arrived on Earth, after which he immediately hid himself from Xavier and Cerebro, something that was believed to be impossible. This particular bit was expanded on in the two-part story covered between X-Men issue number 12 and Excalibur issue number 95, and that after being taken to Moira McTaggart for examination regarding his abilities, she discovered that the telepathic and telekinetic power Nate possessed was on par with Jean Grey as the Phoenix Force. As a result of this immense telepathy, Nate Gray can read the minds of others to learn and understand all languages perfectly. He could read thoughts and emotions left on objects that had previously been touched. He can detect rifts in the fabric of space and time, and he can leave his physical body, allowing him to journey to the astral plane, where he can see the future with relative accuracy. In addition to this, as the solo series continued on, his powers were honed by their constant use, meaning that by issue number 32, titled Who or What is Jackknife?, Nate Gray was shown to be capable of increasing the abilities of other mutants or entities to higher levels. Furthermore, in X-Men issue number 40 titled When Tundra Strikes, during a battle with Tundra, who was an extra-dimensional being capable of controlling the Earth itself, Nate Gray overpowered Tundra by manipulating and isolating the gravitational pull around the villain, which resulted in Tundra being pulled apart at the seams and imploding under the extreme pressure. On top of this, in X-Men issues 63 and 67, Nate's telekinesis was powerful enough that he could move the chemicals around in a woman's brain, curing her of cancer. He collapsed a city 2,600 miles away while having a nightmare. He could manipulate the particles of sand and water, allowing him to make holograms of himself that could interact with the world around them. He could control the molecules of light to make himself invisible. He could project concussive blasts capable of impacting matter on the atomic level. He could manipulate the molecules of solid matter or himself, allowing him to phase through physical objects. He could absorb the electromagnetic spectrum of the Earth and use it to enhance his concussive attacks. He could heal himself from virtually any attack, and he could use his telekinesis to break the barriers of space and time, allowing him to move to any dimension or point in time. Now, having said all that, because the term Omega-level mutant wasn't officially introduced until Grant Morrison's run on New X-Men, at the conclusion of the X-Men series, because an evil version of Jean Grey from the Earth 9575 reality had been around since the beginning of the series, serving to influence and manipulate Nate the entire time, in issue number 70, at the conclusion of the 4-part Shockwave storyline, that of all the versions in the multiverse, including Cable and Strife, Nate Grey was the most powerful version of himself. What this meant was that where the term Omega level didn't exist at the time, this phrasing was meant to indicate Omega level status. However, because Nate had been so powerful and still had a fan base, but also found interest in prospective fans who had only read about his character, while the death of Nate came in 2001 with X-Men issue number 75, after he converted himself to pure energy, following the events of Civil War, Dark Reign, and Siege leading into the Heroic Age in 2010, with Dark X-Men issue number 2, Nate Grey made his return to Marvel Comics, where he was officially given Omega level classification by Hank McCoy in order to explain the power he possessed prior to his death, and the power he would eventually develop if allowed to continue living. With that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end, and if you guys are interested in seeing a full-on character discussion of Nate Grey, let me know in the comments section below, and I will catch you guys later. Peace.